morning, or late morning, I should say. I am back for more reading of poetry and daily meditations. This is something that I've been considering doing for a while, and I was recently inspired by a good friend of mine, Britta, who is doing some life coaching work and personal growth work with women, to step up and put a few things out there in the world that I find interesting. As I mentioned before, I went to school for creative writing, recently published my own book of poetry, and I just thought it would be fun to share with you all some of the things that I do in the morning and some of the writing that inspires me. So, water. The last few days I've been reading sections out of this lovely book. See how cool the back of it is. Galway Kinnell's The Book of Nightmares. This was a book that I read in one of my very early poetry classes with Brad Rogar at Weber State University, and that was my introduction to him. He's been a huge influence on the way that I write, and I know he was also a big influence on my mentor. So I thought I'd start out this whole adventure with the Book of Nightmares, and the past 2 days I've just been reading you little sections of one poem, but I kind of feel like that's a mistake because you can't get the fullness and richness of the whole poem if I'm just reading it in sections. So I'm going to read you the entire poem today, Under the Maud Moon, and then we can move on. But I just want to get all of it out to you so you can experience it in its richness and fullness. So if you've been listening to the past 2 days, then you'll get a small refresher on the beginning of this poem, but it's so beautiful. I hope you don't mind. And for those of you that are just joining in, you'll get the whole thing. So this is the very first poem in the Book of Nightmares, called Under the Maud Moon. And again, it is by Galway Kinnell. I believe you can pick this book up at pretty much any library, or you can purchase it on Amazon or Book Hub, or I think it's on Audible as well. Highly recommend. Under the Maud Moon. On the path by this wet site of old fires, black ashes, black stones, where tramps must have squatted down, gnawing on stream water, unhouseling themselves on cursed bread, failing to get warm at a twig fire, I stop, gather wet wood, cut dry shavings, and for her whose face I held in my hands a few hours, whom I gave back, only to keep holding the space where she was, I light a small fire in the rain. The black wood reddens, the death watches inside, begin running out of time. I can see the dead, crossed limbs longing again for the universe. I can hear in the wet wood the snap and re-snap of the same embrace being torn. The raindrops trying to put the fire out fall into it and are changed, the oath broken, the oath sworn between earth and water, flesh and spirit broken, to be sworn again, over and over in the clouds, and to be broken again, over and over on earth. I sit a moment by the fire, in the rain, speak a few words into its warmth. Stone, saint, smooth, stone, and sing one of the songs I used to croak for my daughter in her nightmares. Somewhere out ahead of me, a black bear sits alone on his hillside, nodding from side to side. He sniffs, the blossom smells, the rained earth. Finally he gets up, eats a few flowers, trudges away, his fur glistening in the rain. The singed grease streams out of the words. The one held note remains, a love note twisting under my tongue like the coyote's bark, curving off into a howl. A round-cheeked girl child comes awake in her crib. The green swaddlings tear open. a filament or vestment tears, the blue flower opens, and she who is born, she who sings and cries, she who begins the passage, her hair sprouting out, her gums budding for the first spring on earth, the mist still clinging about her face, puts her hand into her father's mouth to take hold of his song. It is all over, little one. The flipping and overleaping, the watery somersaulting alone in the oneness under the hill, under the old lonely belly button, pushing forth again in remembrance, the drifting there, furled in the dark, pressing a knee or elbow along a slippery wall, sculpting the world with each thrash, the stream of omphilous blood humming all about you. Her head enters the head hold, which starts sucking her forth. Being itself closing down all over her, gives her into the shuddering grip of departure, the slow, agonized clenches making the last molds of her life in the dark. The black eye opens, the pupil drused with black hair stops, the chakra on the top of the brain throbs, a long moment in world light, and she skids out on her face into light, this peck of stunned flesh clotted with celestial cheesiness, glowing with the astral violet of the underlife, and as they cut her tie to the darkness she dies, a moment, turns blue as a coal, the limbs shaking as the memories rush out of them. When they hang her up by the feet, she sucks air, screams her first song, and turns rose, the slow, beating, featherless arms already clutching at the emptiness. When it was cold on our hillside, and you cried in the crib rocking through the darkness on wood knifed down to the curve of the smile, a sadness stranger than ours, all of it flowing from the other world, I used to come to you and sit by you and sing to you, and you do not know, and yet you will remember. In the silent zones of the brain, a specter, descendant of the ghostly forefathers, singing to you in the nighttime, not the songs of light said to wave through the bright hairs of angels, but a blacker, rasping flowery on the tongue. For when the maud moon glimmered in those first nights, and the archer lay sucking the icy beastings of the cosmos in his crib of stars, I had crept down to river banks, their long rustle of being and perishing down to the marshes, where the earth oozes up in cold streaks, touching the world with the underglimmer of the beginning, and there learned my only song. And in the days when you find yourself orphaned, emptied of all wind singing of light, the pieces of cursed bread on your tongue, may there come back to you a voice, spectral, calling you, sister, from everything that dies. And then you shall open this book, even if it is the Book of Nightmares. Galway Kinnell, the Book of Nightmares. So this whole book is a love song to life, to Galway's children, to his wife, to nature, to his ancestors. I mean, it borders on feeling like some sort of magical incantation book, you know. Even the cover has what appears to be like, it looks like an old woodcut to me. And all of the imagery on the front smacks of alchemy to me. And maybe other people will see other things in it. But it is a very beautiful book. It can be quite visceral at times. But it's so pretty. And it's so full of just richness and grittiness. Like you can feel the dirt and smell the scents when you're reading this book. So I highly recommend it. I love this book. I've read it many, many times, and I'm often very jealous of it as a poet. But yeah, I recommend this book. So if you liked the first poem, it only gets better from here. So I recommend you check it out. So, yeah, now moving on to daily meditations. So when I got the idea to start doing this, I was thinking, what is something that I do every day to get my day going? And I typically wake up in the morning, do a bit of yoga, which I did this morning. I was feeling a bit sluggish this morning, and so I did a Kundalini set that's called Awakening to Your 10 Bodies. And that'll wake you up in the morning, I'll tell you. You don't need coffee after that one. And then I'll get cleaned up, and then I'll read from this book, 365 Days of the Tao. And we've been reading every day together. Yesterday's was on poetry, and so now let's see what today's is. Runaway. Interesting. So, let's read this. This is 217 and 365 Days of the Tao. They call her useless and yet push for achievement. I want a baby, they bicker between themselves and reproach her for being distant. My friends have so much fun. They dwell on money and indenture her to loyalty. I can't stand this every day. She is innocent. They have ambitions. Interesting. So now here's the author's take on that. There was a girl who was both a good student and a good athlete. Her family did not find that to be enough. They pushed her to spend all her time studying or practicing for her next sport competition. Finally, she could stand it no further, and she ran away. Her family was firmly convinced that it was a kidnapping. In so many families, a girl is told how useless she is. Is it any wonder that she gets pregnant? A boy is told how lazy he is. Is it any wonder that he rebels as an act of individuality? When parents demand without understanding, they thwart development. Forcing children to fulfill parental ambitions destroys individuality. Before parents blame their children, they should first look to how their daughters and sons were raised. Let's read that again. Before parents blame their children, they should first look to how their daughters and sons were raised. Okay, so that's all about personal accountability. I guess if you're doing a lot of head scratching as to why did my kid turn out this way, which I'm sure my parents do all the time, maybe they should examine what it is that they did while they were raising me. And that's not to say that like a person's personality or flaws or anything are like a direct result of their parenting, because there also comes a point where you're like a grown human being and you have to take responsibility for yourself. But I think what that was pointing to is that if parents are critical of their children, maybe they should self-examine what they did first. Maybe? I don't know. What do you guys think of that one? That one's kind of a little bit of a head scratcher for me. As a mother of a young child who is just getting ready to go into the schooling system, it's a little hard for me to let him go, just because I myself did not have a particularly awesome schooling experience, because I was a little different, if you can't tell, and I was made fun of for that quite a bit. So my worry for him is less that I'm not going to be in control of him anymore, and more that I don't know how the rest of the world is going to receive him, but I don't have any control over that, so I have to let him go. What do you parents think of that particular passage from the meditations? Sometimes I'll open this book and just go straight to something, and other times I read it per day, and that was a per day one, and I'd never come across that meditation before. So I'd like to know what you guys think of that one, because I'm still trying to process it. Yeah, interesting. Well, this is really experimental for me, so I'd really love your comments and thoughts on trying to start a channel where I share poetry and book reviews and things like that. Is that interesting to you? I find it highly interesting, and it's not always something that I get to share with everybody because I don't always have like a book handy to be like, hey, check this out, let me read you a passage. So I thought this would be a good way to share, and I hope you're enjoying it. Like as far as my yoga stuff goes, if you're interested in that, let me know. The Kundalini stuff that I did this morning is really, really fascinating, and I recently met someone at a party that I was invited to, like, spur of the moment. And these are the kind of situations I get myself into all the time. Like, I just met someone, and they invited me to their son's birthday party the very next day, and my kids seemed to like their kids, so I showed up. And then while I was there, I met someone that had a lot of similar interests to me, and we got on some really interesting conversations. And she had gone through a Kundalini yoga training, and so we had some conversations about that. And that's a form of yoga that I don't know that many people have been exposed to. So if you're curious about that, you can feel free to ask. And if there's anything else you'd like to ask me, feel free. And tomorrow I'm going to move to a book instead of poetry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a book that I've been reading recently and why I find it interesting. So I hope you all have a good day, and I love you. Bye-bye.